Have you ever heard a voice that wasn't supposed to be there? A whisper in the darkness that knows your name, your secrets, your sins? This is the story of Marcus Chen, a man who thought he could bury the past until an antique radio dug it back up. What began as static became a conversation. What began as a conversation became a confession. And what began as a confession became revenge from beyond the grave. The rain hammered against the windows of Blackwood pawn shop like accusing fingers. Each drop a reminder of things Marcus Chen wanted to forget. He stood behind the counter, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass, watching water streak down like tears he'd never allowed himself to shed. It had been 15 years since that night. 15 years since the accident that wasn't really an accident. 15 years since David Murphy died on that rain-slicked mountain road. Marcus shook his head, pushing the memories down deep where they belonged. He'd built a good life since then, a successful business, a reputation in the community, a future that looked nothing like his past. The guilt had faded to a dull ache, something he'd learned to live with. Like an old injury that only hurt when the weather changed. The shop bell chimed, pulling him from his thoughts. An elderly woman shuffled in, her clothes soaked despite the umbrella clutched in her gnarled hands. Water pooled around her feet as she approached the counter, her eyes milky with cataracts but somehow still piercing. "I need to sell something," she said, her voice like wind through dead leaves. Marcus nodded professionally. "What do you have?" She hefted a large object onto the counter, wrapped in a moth-eaten blanket. When she pulled the fabric away, Marcus found himself staring at an antique radio, a beautiful piece from the 1940s. Its wooden cabinet, intricately carved with Art Deco patterns. The dial glowed faintly amber, though it wasn't plugged in. "But I need the money more than I need the memories." Marcus examined it carefully, his hands running over the smooth wood. Something about it made his skin prickle, but he couldn't identify why. The craftsmanship was exquisite. He could easily sell it for 3 times what he'd pay her. "I can give you $200, he offered. The woman's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "It's worth more than that, but I'll take it. Just be careful with it. It has a way of bringing things to the surface. Things that were meant to stay buried." Chill ran down Marcus's spine, but he dismissed it as the draft from the door. Old people said strange things. He counted out the bills, and the woman took them with trembling fingers. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "The radio has a mind of its own," she said without looking back. "It doesn't just receive signals. Sometimes it sends them to 2 people who need to hear them." Then she was gone, swallowed by the rain and the darkness. Marcus stared at the radio for a long moment before carrying it to his apartment above the shop. He lived alone, had lived alone since his wife left 3 years ago, tired of competing with ghosts she couldn't see. The apartment was neat but soulless. It's decorated with furniture that came from the shop but held no real meaning for him. He set the radio on the mantelpiece, where it seemed to watch him with its unlit dial like a sleeping eye. That night he tried to ignore it, but his gaze kept drifting back. Finally, curiosity won. He plugged it in. The dial glowed warmly, amber lights spilling across the dark room. Marcus turned the tuning knob, expecting static or perhaps an old-fashioned station playing big band music. Instead, he heard only white noise, a rushing sound like wind or water or whispered voices too far away to understand. He was about to turn it off when the static shifted, coalescing into something almost like words. Marcus leaned closer, his heart beating faster. "Marcus," he jerked back, his hand flying to his chest. No, that was impossible. Just his imagination, his guilt manifesting in random noise patterns. He reached to turn it off, but the voice came again, clearer this time. Marcus Chen. His name. The radio had said his name. "Who is this?" His voice cracked. "This isn't funny." The static swirled and eddied, and then another voice emerged, a voice he hadn't heard in 15 years, but would recognize anywhere. A voice that should have been silent, buried 6 feet under cold earth. "Hello, Marcus." "It's been a long time." David Murphy, his former business partner, his best friend. The man he'd killed. Marcus's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his armchair, staring at the radio in horror. "You're dead," he whispered. "You're dead. I saw you die." "You did more than see it," the voice said, tinged with amusement, but also something darker, something patient and cold. "You caused it. Remember?" The room suddenly felt too small, too hot despite the rain-cooled air. Marcus's hands shook as he gripped the armrests. It was an accident. The road was wet, the visibility was poor. "You cut my brake lines?" David's voice interrupted, calm and factual. "You knew I was driving to Portland that night. You knew the mountain road was the only route. You knew exactly what would happen when I tried to brake on that hairpin turn." "No," Marcus said, but the word held no conviction. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "No, I wouldn't. Ty didn't. You did," the radio insisted, and now other voices joined in. A chorus of static-laced whispers. "You wanted the business for yourself. You wanted my share of the profits? You wanted me gone?" Marcus lunged for the radio, yanking the plug from the wall. The dial went dark, the voices cutting off mid-sentence. He stood there, breathing hard, staring at the dead machine, just his imagination. Guilt and stress, and too many sleepless nights. Nothing more. But even as he tried to convince himself he knew the truth, he'd heard David's voice. Really heard it? And David knew what he'd done. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain and the creaking of the old building. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. The radio sat in the living room, unplugged and dark, but he could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on his chest. When dawn finally broke, gray and reluctant, Marcus dragged himself out of bed. He looked like hell-dark circles under his eyes, his hair disheveled, his hands still trembling slightly. He needed coffee. He needed to think clearly. There had to be a rational explanation. Radios didn't talk back. Dead men didn't speak through antique electronics. It was impossible. He showered, dressed, and went downstairs to open the shop, determinedly not looking at the radio as he passed through the living room. Normal routine. Normal day? Everything was fine. The morning passed slowly. A few customers came in regulars looking for vintage jewelry, college students selling textbooks, a contractor looking for old tools. Marcus went through the motions, smiling and haggling and making sales. But his mind was elsewhere. Around noon, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Blackwood Pawn. This is Marcus. Static. Just static, with something moving underneath it. Something that might have been breathing. "Hello?" Marcus said, his voice tight. "You can't ignore me forever," David's voice said through the phone, crystal clear. "We have unfinished business, you and I." Marcus slammed the phone down, his heart racing. This was impossible. Completely impossible. Dead men didn't make phone calls. They didn't speak through radios. They didn't. The shop's old-fashioned cash register dinged, its drawer sliding open of its own accord. Inside, on top of the bills, lay a photograph Marcus hadn't seen in years. It showed two men, young and smiling, standing in front of a newly opened pawn shop. Marcus and David, 15 years ago, before greed and jealousy had poisoned everything. With shaking hands, Marcus picked up the photo. On the back, in handwriting he recognized as his own, someone had written, "Partners forever." Not quite forever, though, a voice said behind him. Marcus spun around, but the shop was empty. No customers. No David, just the voice. Emanating from the old radio in the corner of the shop, a radio he'd never brought down from his apartment, a radio that should still be upstairs. Unplugged. Yet there it sat on the counter, its dial glowing amber. David's voice pouring out like blood from a wound. "You took my life, Marcus. You took my dreams, my future, my chance to see my daughter grow up. Did you know Emily just graduated medical school? Of course you didn't. You haven't thought about her once in 15 years, have you?" Marcus backed away, pressing himself against the wall. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God help me, I'm sorry. But you're gone. You're supposed to be gone." "Gone?" The radio crackled with dark laughter. "Death isn't an ending, Marcus. It's a doorway. And sometimes, when the wrong is great enough, when the injustice screams loud enough, that door swings both ways. I've been watching you, waiting, and now I found a way back. The lights in the shop began to flicker. Every electronic device, the cash register, the security cameras, the customers' phones left for trade, all of them sparked to life. All of them speaking with David's voice. You can't run from what you've done. You can't hide from the truth. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It's time to pay for your sins. Marcus Chen. Marcus's scream caught in his throat as the shop plunged into darkness, every light extinguishing simultaneously. In the blackness, the radio's amber dial glowed like an accusing eye. David's voice wrapped around him like grasping hands. "This is only the beginning," the voice promised. "Before I'm done, everyone will know what you are. Everyone will know what you did. And then, Marcus, then you'll join me in the darkness where you belong." The lights flickered back on. The shop was normal again, quiet and still. The radio sat on the counter, dark and silent, just an antique object with no power, no malice. But Marcus knew better now. He knew that his past had finally caught up with him, and there would be no escaping it. Not this time. The question wasn't whether he would pay for what he'd done. The question was how much it would cost him and whether he'd survive. The reckoning that was coming. The next 3 days blurred together in a nightmare of sleep deprivation and paranoia. Marcus stopped going home, sleeping in the shop's back room on a cot surrounded by locked safes and security cameras. He'd thrown the radio into the dumpster behind the building, but it didn't matter. David's voice found him anyway, through car radios, through the speakers of passing phones, through the static between television channels. Everywhere Marcus went, the dead man followed. He tried ignoring it. He tried rationalizing it as a psychotic break, as stress-induced hallucinations. He even bought sleeping pills and anxiety medication, swallowing them by the handful. Nothing worked. The voice remained patient and relentless, slowly dismantling the walls Marcus had built around his guilt. On the 4th morning, Marcus sat in his shop, unshaven and hollow-eyed. When the bell above the door chimed, a young woman entered, mid-20s, with David Murphy's eyes. Marcus's heart stopped. "Mr. Chen?" she said, approaching the counter hesitantly. "I'm Emily Murphy. I think you knew my father." The world tilted. Marcus gripped the counter to stay upright, staring at this ghost made flesh. David's daughter. The child he'd left fatherless. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Yes, I knew him. I'm so sorry for your loss." Emily's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, something that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of her father's knowing gaze. Through the radio, "That's actually why I'm here. I've been going through Dad's old belongings. I found something strange. Recordings, letters, documentation of his business partnership with you." Cold dread seeped through Marcus's chest. "I don't understand, don't you?" Emily set a folder on the counter, sliding it toward him. "My father was meticulous about record keeping. He documented everything about your business together, including his concerns about financial discrepancies in the weeks before his death, including his decision to audit the books, including his appointment with a lawyer the day after he died." Marcus's hands shook as he opened the folder. Inside were copies of financial records, dates, and numbers that told a damning story of embezzlement, of money slowly siphoned from their joint accounts into Marcus's private holdings. Proof of motive. Proof of betrayal. "Police called it an accident," Emily continued, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Brake failure on a wet road. But Dad had just had the car serviced 2 days before. The mechanic confirmed the brakes were perfect. So I started wondering, what if it wasn't an accident?" "This is insane," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Your father was my friend." "I would never. My father was many things, Mr. Chen, but careless wasn't one of them, and neither am I." Emily leaned across the counter, her eyes boring into his. "I've spent the last 3 years investigating his death, quietly, carefully. I've talked to mechanics, reviewed police reports, studied brake systems. And do you know what I found?" Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't move. "Cutting brake lines isn't as easy as movies make it look," Emily said. "It requires knowledge, access, and opportunity. You had all three. You'd worked on cars together. You had keys to his house, to his garage. And the night before he died, you were seen at his place. The neighbor remembers because you arrived late. Around midnight, I was returning some tools, Marcus whispered. Maybe you were ensuring my father would never make it to that lawyer's appointment. Maybe you were protecting yourself from the embezzlement investigation he was about to launch. The shop felt too small, the air too thick. Marcus's vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after 15 years of silence. But here's the thing, Emily continued, pulling out her phone. I can't prove it. Not legally. The evidence is circumstantial. The car was totaled in the crash. The brake line damage consistent with impact trauma. No way to prove it was tampered with beforehand. So for 3 years I've been stuck. Until now. She tapped her phone, and David's voice filled the shop. It's crackling with static, but unmistakably clear. Marcus Chen murdered me. He cut my brake lines. He knew about the audit. He knew I'd discovered his theft. He killed me to keep his secrets safe. Marcus stared at the phone in horror. Where did you get that? It appeared on my phone 3 days ago, Emily said, pocketing the device. No sender. No explanation. Just my father's voice, telling me what I'd always suspected. At first I thought it was a cruel prank. But then, more messages came. Details only my father could have known. Locations, times, specific conversations between you two. Things no one else could possibly know. She studied Marcus's face, and he knew what she saw. Their terror, guilt, the collapse of carefully maintained lies. Someone is helping me, Emily said softly. Someone who knows the truth, and they're not going to stop until justice is served. The radio in the corner, a different one from the shop's inventory, suddenly crackled to life. David's voice emerged, speaking directly to his daughter. Tell him, Emily. Tell him what happens next. Emily's expression hardened. You're going to confess, Mr. Chen. You're going to tell the police everything you did. Every detail of how you murdered my father. And if you don't, she gestured to her phone. These recordings will be released publicly. Your customers will hear them. Your friends? Everyone in this town? You'll be ruined, even if you're never convicted. And if I do confess? Marcus asked hoarsely. Then maybe you'll find some peace. Maybe the voice will finally stop. Emily turned toward the door, then paused. My father was a good man. He didn't deserve what you did to him. But he also wouldn't want me to become a monster in pursuit of justice. So I'm giving you a choice. Make it count. She left, the bell chiming cheerfully behind her, grotesquely at odds with the gravity of the moment. Marcus stood alone in the shop, surrounded by the detritus of other people's lives, other people's memories. Everything he'd built, everything he'd become, was constructed on a foundation of murder and lies. And now that foundation was crumbling. The radio continued to speak in David's voice. What will it be, Marcus? Will you finally face what you've done? Or will you run like you've been running for 15 years? That night, Marcus didn't run. Instead, he did something he should have done 15 years ago. He picked up the phone and called Detective Sarah Morrison, the officer who'd investigated David's death. Detective Morrison, this is Marcus Chen. I need to talk to you about the David Murphy case. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. There was a long pause. Mr. Chen, that case was closed as an accidental death. Why are you calling me at home after 15 years? Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his guilt like chains around his chest. Because it wasn't an accident. And I know that because I'm the one who killed him. The words hung in the air, impossible to take back. Marcus felt something break inside him, not his resolve, but the wall he'd built around his conscience. Tears streamed down his face, years of suppressed remorse finally finding release. Mr. Chen, I need you to stay where you are. Don't move, don't leave. I'm coming to you now. Do you understand? Yes, Marcus whispered. I understand. I'll be here. I'm not running anymore. He hung up and sat in the darkness of his shop, waiting. The radio glowed softly beside him, but David's voice had fallen silent. In its place was only the gentle hum of static, almost peaceful now, almost forgiving. 20 minutes later, Detective Morrison arrived with 2 uniformed officers. Marcus went with them without resistance, climbing into the back of the patrol car with something that felt almost like relief. As they pulled away from the shop, Marcus looked back one last time in the window of his apartment above. He could see the silhouette of a man standing in the amber glow of the antique radio. The figure raised one hand in a gesture that might have been goodbye or might have been absolution. Then the patrol car turned the corner, and the shop disappeared from view. The courtroom was packed for the sentencing. Marcus had pled guilty to second-degree murder, and the prosecution had agreed to recommend a reduced sentence in exchange for his full cooperation and confession. He'd told them everything: the embezzlement, the planning, the execution, 15 years of lies. Judge Patricia Hartwell looked down at him from the bench, her expression grave. "Mr. Chen, you've admitted to taking a man's life to protect your own financial interests. You've robbed a daughter of her father, a family of their loved one. The law demands justice, and justice will be served. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in the state penitentiary, with the possibility of parole after 10. Marcus nodded, accepting the sentence. It was more mercy than he deserved. As the bailiffs led him away, he caught sight of Emily Murphy in the gallery. She wasn't smiling, but there was something in her eyes. Not happiness, but perhaps closure. The long battle was over. Her father's death had finally been acknowledged, if not fully avenged. And sitting beside Emily, visible only to Marcus, was David Murphy himself. Or perhaps it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But Marcus saw him, clearly saw the sad smile, the acceptance, the release. David nodded once, and then he was gone, fading like static, resolving into silence. Prison wasn't easy, but Marcus found it easier to bear than the weight of his secret had been. He worked in the library, helped other inmates with their legal correspondence, and attended every therapy session and parole hearing with genuine contrition. He'd started writing letters to Emily, not asking for forgiveness. Never that, but offering what small amends he could. He'd signed over his share of the business's original value to her, sold the pawn shop, and donated the proceeds to a scholarship fund in David's name. It wasn't enough, would never be enough. But it was something to his surprise. Emily wrote back. Not immediately and not frequently, but her letters came. They were brief, factual, but not cruel. She told him about finishing her medical residency, about the scholarship fund's first recipient, about finally being able to visit her father's grave without rage consuming her. "I don't forgive you," she wrote in one letter. "I don't know if I ever will, but I can see that you're trying to be better than the man you were. My father would have appreciated that. He believed in second chances, in redemption. Maybe that's his real legacy, not his death, but his capacity for hope." Marcus kept that letter in his cell, reading it when the guilt threatened to overwhelm him. He had 8 more years to serve, but he would serve them knowing that he'd finally done the right thing, even if it came 15 years too late. And late at night, when the prison fell quiet, Marcus sometimes thought he could hear it, not David's voice anymore, but a different sound. The gentle hum of an old radio settling into peaceful static. A signal finally finding its rest. A message delivered and received. The dead could speak. But only if the living were willing to listen. Marcus had finally learned to hear. Emily Murphy stood in the abandoned Blackwood pawn shop, now owned by a real estate developer planning to convert the building into apartments. She'd asked permission to retrieve something from the property before demolition began. In the dusty back room, she found it the antique radio, sitting on a shelf exactly where Marcus had left it years ago. The radio that had somehow channeled her father's voice, that had driven Marcus to confession, had given her the justice she'd sought for so long. Emily ran her fingers over the carved wood, feeling the craftsmanship beneath the dust. Part of her wanted to destroy it, to smash it and scatter the pieces, to eliminate this strange object that existed at the intersection of grief and impossible things. But another part, the part that was her father's daughter, couldn't do it. Instead, she carefully wrapped the radio in a blanket and carried it to her car. That night, in her own apartment, she plugged it in one last time. The dial glowed amber, warm and familiar. Static filled the room, but no voice emerged. It's just the peaceful white noise of empty frequencies, of signals sent and received, of messages delivered and purposes fulfilled. Emily smiled. The first truly peaceful smile she'd managed since learning the truth about her father's death. She unplugged the radio and placed it on her shelf, next to a photograph of David Murphy Young, smiling, alive. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered to the silence, "for not letting me give up, for finding a way back, however impossible, for making sure justice was served." The radio sat silent, but Emily could have sworn the amber glow pulsed once, warmly, like a father's final embrace. Outside, the rain began to fall, washing the streets clean, carrying away the dust of old sins and older sorrows. And in a prison cell 50 miles away, Marcus Chen slept peacefully for the first time in years, dreaming not of guilt or ghosts, but of redemption, of second chances, of radios that spoke truth into darkness. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but acknowledgement, atonement, and acceptance, these are the frequencies on which the dead and the living can finally find peace. The radio had stopped talking back. Its message had been heard. And in the silence that followed, something very much like forgiveness began to grow.